My family was never particularly religious. Sure, we had a few rituals here and there, but nothing too overbearing. Except when it came to her. Perhaps a small town mystery or a scary story to keep kids in line come bedtime. The girl with the skipping rope had been a part of our hometown lore for over 50 years. The rules were simple. After the sun went down, we were not to open the door if we heard a girl skipping rope outside. She would pretend to be lost and ask for her parents, but under no circumstances were we to help her. If we ignored her cries for help long enough, she would leave us alone. If you grow up with something, you come to accept it as gospel truth, no matter how implausible it may be. To me, she was nothing more than Santa's evil cousin who would visit us every couple of years. I was around 12 when I had my first encounter with her. Almost at the cusp of my teenage years, I had decided to subvert my parents' authority and watch late-night TV. I had heard from extremely reliable sources at school that they would play reruns of all my favorite shows at 12 a.m. Besides, it was a Friday night, and I didn't have to get up early. My parents had tucked me in and were out in the kitchen wrapping up dinner. I waited patiently, staring at the lights at the threshold of my door. The dishwasher started running, and soon enough, the lights turned on. Tiptoeing my way across the living room, I made myself comfortable in front of the TV. I had to increase the volume just enough to not arouse suspicion. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it. Clank. I froze. I thought I had been busted. Dad must have opened his door and found me. Clank. I turned around, but he wasn't there. Clank. Soon enough, I heard hush knocks on the door. I knew enough not to open it. Mom had drilled that into me, yet something about the sound drew me to it. I just had to see her. I struggled, but eventually decided to look out the window to see who the girl was. I was pulling the curtains when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I was about to scream, but a hand was on my mouth. "What the hell are you doing? Shut up and don't move." It was my dad. He had heard the TV and spotted me next to the door. He slowly pulled me back and carried me to my room, but not before I was able to see her. I couldn't make out much. Her black hair was covering her face and her eyes were pointed to the ground. She was dressed in white but was covered completely in mud and dirt. She just stood there with her rope, waiting at the door. "What's wrong with you, Aaron? Have you lost your damn mind? Stay here. Let me get your mother." I knew I had messed up. Mom was going to kill me. She came in and started frantically pacing around the room. She didn't open the door. I caught her in time. My dad said, "No, you don't understand. Being near her is enough of a curse. We're fucked." That was one of the few times I heard Mom curse. After what felt like an hour of yelling, I was told to go into my room. I was grounded for a week. In that week, Father Brown stopped by to bless the house. Mom and Dad became extremely reserved around me. You'd think I shot the family dog. Over the course of the next month, there were rumors that she was visiting the town again. Behaviors radically changed. What was once a bustling community was now at a standstill. Lights would be out by 9 p.m. Kids were not allowed to stay out after dark. Church was packed every Saturday. All of this seemed performative to me until Mark disappeared. Mark had been one of my closest friends at school, and I had told him about my encounter multiple times. I knew he wasn't stupid enough to open the door. The police treated it as a missing case, but we all know what happened. I was an inconsolable mess for the rest of the year. Needless to say, I didn't ever stay up late again. Mark wasn't the only one, however. Next, it was Paul who lived by the river, then Miss Wu who ran our town bakery. Finally, a little girl named Julia disappeared from her mom's house. The police didn't know what to make of this. There were no clues to any of the disappearances. The doors were open voluntarily. There were no signs of forced entry. The victims had seemed normal until their disappearance. No leads were ever found. Everyone stayed extremely vigilant. Parents would sleep with their kids with a shotgun next to the bed. Over the next year or two, the fear died down. No one really spoke about the disappearances or the girl, although it was always a lingering thought for most people in town. A good amount of people moved, and the state dedicated more resources and personnel to our city. With the band-aid of time, things got better. 4 years later, they found Miss Wu's body in the forest. From what they could make of the corpse, she had been choked to death with a metal object. Her face was brutally caved in, and her skull had significant blunt force trauma. By this point, however, she was nothing more than a footprint in the newspaper. Eventually, I moved to the city. The girl with the skipping rope would pop in my nightmares here and there, but besides that, I never paid much attention to her. Life was busy and I wanted to move from my small town. I turned 40 last year, now with a daughter of my own. I realized that my parents did their best to protect me my whole life. Perhaps it was this thought that led to the events of last night. "Mom, someone's at the door." My daughter startled me awake. It was 8 p.m. and it looked like I had fallen asleep on the couch. I got up to investigate. Clank, clank, clank. My blood ran cold and it felt like my legs were giving out. I picked up my daughter and locked her in her room. 29 years. 29 years had gone by. I didn't believe this was happening. I was probably in one of my nightmares. Clank, clank, clank. I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, I was the scared child caught watching TV in the living room. The same force that compelled me to let her in all those years ago came back much stronger. I was able to gather myself and turned around to go to the room. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of her from the window. The same dirty white clothes, the same black hair, except this time she was staring right at me, her eyes piercing through my soul. She smiled at me and beckoned me to let her in. I decided to run, but before I knew it, I was in the forest being pulled by my neck, 1,000 little knives being dragged across my back. The legends got one thing wrong. The sound was not her skipping rope. She had always been holding a long metal chain, and now she was going to kill me with it. I struggled and tried to break free from the noose around my neck. I heard her laughing at my efforts. Please let me go. I have a daughter." I struggled to get the words out. Fueled by adrenaline, I pulled the chain forward to where I could catch my breath. I snuck out from under that chain and ran. I ran as fast as I could across the forest, but I could hear her following me. Someone spotted me by the highway and called the police. At the hospital, I tried explaining the girl with the chain who had tried to kill me, yet no one would believe me. Temporary psychosis, I believe they called it. The doctors theorized that I had tried to harm myself and I was committed for 7 days. My daughter has since been staying with my mom, and I can breathe a sigh of relief because I know the girl will be waiting for me when I get out. The Wilhelm scream. Come on, you have to know about it. Is that the guy who was running for president and did that creepy scream which tanked his run? Lily sighs at me, rolling her eyes. You know, that fake scream that happens when there's an explosion of people running in a horror movie? I'm pretty sure they used it in SpongeBob too. She takes a long drink from her kombucha. At least, I think that's what it is. She has been known to sneak her dad's alcohol. Once you hear it everywhere. What does that have to do with the movie? We had put on some crappy horror movie that we were barely watching while scrolling our social media. Lily and I had been doing Friday night movies since we were kids. Lately, though, it seemed more like an obligation than something to look forward to. She'd been on and off again with something new, and had been distant for a while since. A quiet ding goes off on her phone. A name lights up her screen, but she moves it away from me too fast for me to read it. My favorite thing in the world is that smile of hers, but right now it's aimed at her phone and not at me. She looks over at me, her indigo hair hanging over one side. You want to meet my next hot thing? She whispers. Lily invites over Alex from chemistry. There's some exchange of eyebrow raises and tight hugs between them, and I feel like a third wheel in my own home. I sit on the couch and pretend to watch the end of the movie while I make quick glances at the touchy display at the front door. Really? This movie's the worst. Alex giggles at the movie. A sepia filter showing a flashback scene leaves a bad taste in my mouth. When you've been doing this for 15 years, you start to run out of movies. I roll my eyes, but Alex isn't even looking, too busy checking out Lily's backside as she rummages through her bag. Lily is digging through her bag desperately, looking for something entertaining. She pulls out many bottles of Jack. The desperation to impress Alex is palpable. Oh, sorry, I don't drink anymore, Alex replies. Too many calories. Watching my weight for sports season. Yeah, of course. Don't want swim season to be any harder. She looks around my bedroom, scanning. We have some games here, I guess. Cards Against Humanity or a Ouija board. A little juvenile, yeah? Alex is looking bored already. A junior, but with the attitude of a freshman. No wonder Lily is interested. Alex has a sleek blue Mustang that Lily wants to ride in badly. Take pictures for her Insta. She won't listen when I try to explain that the Mustang was bought with money from Alex's dad selling drugs. Lily says those are just rumors, but I've seen him under the bleachers after football games, hawking drugs to teenagers the same age as Alex. How about we do something a little more risky? Lily bats her eyes at Alex, her fake eyelashes starting to come off her face. I think she's forgotten I'm still here. I'm sure Lily's mind is flooded with Truth and Dare or 7 Minutes in Heaven, but the smile on Alex's face is much more sinister. Yeah, I've got just the thing. I realize now I'm never going to get my chemistry homework done. I do have feelings for Lily, but I'm comfortable enough with her bad habits that I'm not worried about her and this new fling. She always tries real hard with these new hot things, gets obsessive, and they dump her by the next week. Usually, I let her ghost me for a week or two, get ahead on my homework, work extra hours at my job. Then she shows up on my doorstep on Friday night, and I order Hawaiian pizza, grab her Cherry Garcia ice cream from the freezer, and know that my chance will come in a few years when she's tired of these trash humans taking a dump all over her. So for now, I ignore her checking out Alex's physique. Know that I'm staying up late to finish my homework and resign myself to a late night. Where are we going? Lily asks. I can see her breath in the late October air, it being much colder than normal in this abandoned field. I guess there's no homes or roads out here to artificially warm the air. I pull my thin jacket closer to my arms. There's this place my ex and I used to go before she joined the cult and I dumped her. More like she dumped you, I thought. We're going to get tetanus out here, stepping on a rusty nail or something. An abandoned farmhouse was coming into view, and there were broken farm vehicles all over the lot. I saw rusty metal next to a patch of tall grass. I felt mosquitoes climbing up my legs already. Almost there, Alex replies. I watch Alex pull up their phone, and there's no signal out here. My own phone is almost dead from watching TikTok during algebra. Man, I really don't like Lily for dragging me out here right now. We walk into the dilapidated farmhouse. It smells awful, like something died in here. I see a possum carcass in the corner and pull my shirt over my nose. Furniture is broken all over the room, and the roof is caved in on one corner. I wonder if the furniture is broken from time, a frat party, or the abusive family that once lived here. It puts a chill in my spine that won't go away. Alex overturns a recliner and walks into a back room, the recliner making a creepy noise as it rocks back and forth on the rotting floor. There's chalk and candles in this back room, and I know this is far from the first time Alex had been here. Lily sinks into a gross-looking pillow in one corner. Alex pulls out a book with a black leather cover. Lily uses her phone to light the room, finding some matches and lighting the half-spent candles. Alex grabs some chalk from behind a pillow and begins drawing symbols on the floor. No pentagram, though, as I expect. Just scribbles, some of it looking like Elvish. Pretty letters that swirl and swish on the floor. It's unfamiliar to me. I took some Korean and Chinese during my weeaboo phase, but it doesn't look like the blocky, harsh things from those languages at all. What are you writing, Alex? No reply. The scribbles are getting harsher, smaller, somewhat deranged looking. Alex? Still nothing. Lily? I whisper. She's silent in her corner, trembling. I can't get her to look at me and panic sets in. Lily, let's go. I try to yell it, but my voice is quiet from fear. Suddenly, Alex's hands are slamming the white chalk into the floorboards, the tiny stubble of chalk shattering against the wood. The final scribbles are huge, the chalk now ingrained on Alex's fingers, scraping the residue against the wood. Blood starts to pour on the floor. Alex's fingernails, still shaping the last letters through the chalk, is now gone. With the last letter done, Alex falls back against the wall and falls silent. A pool of blood starts to coagulate next to the letters, and I begin to fight the paralysis that has taken hold of me. I grab Lily, my hands shaking so bad it reminds me of my grandmother with Parkinson's. My feet give out from under me as I try to pull her from the room, and I break my nose as my foot goes through the rotten wood. Lily doesn't move, tears pouring from her eyes. A voice breaks the tension in the room and my head snaps to the front door. A woman's voice is speaking outside the front door, drifting into the room. It's not understandable, but it calms me instantly. The voice is sweet and comforting, and it reaches me along with the most wonderful smell. The perfume so intense it feels like my whole body is wrapped up in a bubble of it. Lily, what is it? What is what, Derek? The creepy house or Alex bleeding on the floor? Could she not hear or smell it? It's the most wonderful thing I've ever heard or smelled, and she seemed immune. Alex crouched on all fours in the corner, looking at me as I spoke. Let's just go, Derek. Let's get out of this hellhole. She tries to pull me away, grabbing my ankle from the floor. Her hands are covered in blood from my ankle, and she freezes. But I don't care. I want to listen to this beautiful voice. Alex looks like a wild animal suddenly, crawling on top of me and spitting in my face. Where is she? Alex's blood streams down her hands, spit and blood mixing on my shirt. What? I stammer. She stole my father. Where the fuck is she? She slams my head into the floor, creating a new hole. I ignore the pain as the voice calls out to me again. Alex sees my reaction and looks up at the door. The front door opens with a squeak. The only sound in the house is Lily's crying and the clanking of metal. It reminds me of the bangles Lily used to wear in middle school. Clank, clank, clank. Alex stands up and faces the door to the room, fists balled. She pulls a knife from her long boots. The voice echoes around me one last time before the door slams open. A woman dressed in gold silk opens the door, long black hair over her face. Her arms move slightly and her gold bracelets clank over her arms. The woman faces me, ignoring Alex right in front of her. She begins to walk towards me, and her scent is so overpowering I cannot move. Lily's cries turn to screams, but the phantom seems unaffected. Alex lunges at the specter, and Lily's screams become deafening. I cannot turn to look at her though, my eyes trained on the beautiful woman in front of me. Alex begins screaming incoherently, stabbing the woman with her hunting knife. She knocks the woman to the ground, using her legs to pin the phantom to the floor. But the phantom does not scream nor bleed. Her hair is knocked away from her face and reveals a horrifying visage, an old witch-like face. My body turns from freeze to flight, and I pick up Lily from the corner and jump over Alex and the woman and run. I run until I'm at Lily's home, inside her bed, and I collapse into her purple bedding. We lie together in the bed for what seems like hours, terrified and afraid. At some point, we fall asleep in each other's arms. The early morning light wakes me, and I sit up in terror. But I am safe. Lily is safe, and that's all I focus on. Maybe that's selfish, but that's all I care about. I stroke Lily's hair, bloody and dirty from our adventure. She sleeps for hours, and I don't leave until her parents are about to be home from work. It's Sunday, and I still have chemistry homework to do. Alex didn't return to school on Monday or Tuesday. Wednesday morning came and went, and Alex appeared at Lily and I's lunch table. She didn't say anything. Her hands were wrapped in bandages, and her arms were in long sleeves, covering the bruises that were surely there. She sits quietly in the chair opposite us. Lily doesn't look up. That thing killed my dad. I had to get revenge on it. It took me 3 years to figure out how to summon it. I'm sorry I had to use you both. I needed a man because it won't come for women. I knew you two were always together, and I took advantage of that. I didn't think you would get hurt, and I'm sorry for it. She looks down at my bandaged ankle and at Lily's hair. Lily had to cut her purple locks short because of all the blood in it. Alex twiddles her fingers together, uncomfortable from this conversation. I'm leaving. It's just my mom and we have to move again. Keep the debtors away. They still think my dad is in hiding and don't believe he's dead. That he joined the cartel and moved to Mexico, but we watched him get murdered by that thing on vacation. At least now Mom and I can sleep at night. Alex stands then, and I notice Lily is holding onto my hands like a vice. I squeeze back and she eases somewhat. I watch Alex reach into her messenger bag and pull out a gold bracelet. The clinking sound we had heard that night. She places it on the cafeteria table and walks out of the building. We never saw her again. Lily was too scared to take the bracelet, so I did. It felt wrong to throw it out, and all the terror considered, I took it to a pawn shop and sold it. Bought a promise ring for Lily. She's still dealing with the trauma, but I want her to know I'll be there when she's ready. I'll be there even when things that shouldn't be on this earth will be. I won't tell her that late at night, sometimes I still hear the voice. Except now it's a scream. Lily was right. Once you hear that sound, you hear it everywhere. So, I screwed up really bad. You know that feeling when you've ordered something online you're really excited about? Where every day afterwards is filled with anxiety 9 to 5, trying to do mental math on how long the order would take to arrive without having any idea how the postal system works and checking your front porch every 10 minutes? Yeah, so that was the mental state I was in when I clicked on my spam folder yesterday afternoon. I'd hoped that maybe the seller had emailed me a tracking update, but that my filter had caught it. And sure enough, right at the top of the list was an email with the title, "Your parcel has been dispatched." I clicked on it excitedly, and everything seemed normal. The thing I had ordered was a coffee mug that had a heating element in the base. It would keep your drink warm for hours before needing to be charged, which could be done via USB. I was working from home at the moment, and I constantly forgot that I made my coffee ages ago, and would take a big swig only to find it stone cold. Not exactly the most thrilling item in the world, but it's the little things, you know? The email read, "Thank you for your order. Your parcel is on its way." They had included a picture of a package with my name and address written on its label. The photo was a little blurry and obviously taken in a dark room, but I could just make out the writing. This is when I started to feel a little uneasy. See, the cardboard of the package was in rough shape, folded and crumpled too many times and covered with filth. The label was a little better. The handwriting was shocking, probably penned by someone half blind and with a terrible shake in their hand. I reread the opening part of the email and glanced at the sender. I won't write down their email address here, but it was basically just a random string of numbers and letters that didn't seem to have anything to do with the company I ordered the mug from. At this point, I should have just deleted the email and got on with the rest of my day. I wish I'd done that. There was more text below the photo though, and I really wanted that mug. It said, "Please reply with the place you wish for our couriers to leave your parcel." The options are mailbox, front door, or an area out of sight from the footpath. Once you have selected an option, please allow 1 to 3 business days for arrival. This was pretty weird, but we've had some trouble recently in my neighborhood with parcels being stolen, so I hit reply and typed, "Out of sight, please," and hit send. I went to close the window and return to my work, but before I could, another message popped into my spam folder. The title was, "Area selected, your bedroom." The email it was sent from was a different string of numbers and letters this time. I opened it against my better judgment. There was no text. Just a blurry photo looking down on the small rug that sits in front of my bedside table. It was unmistakably mine. The bedside table bore the same dents from when I carried it up the stairs. The rug had the same small tear from the time I drunkenly tripped over it last year. I jumped up and grabbed the first heavy thing I laid my eyes on, which was an encyclopedia I had gotten from my grandmother. Holding it before me, I crept into the hallway and stopped in front of my bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, just the way I had left it. I nudged it open with my toe, simultaneously raising the book above my head, prepared to strike. The room was empty. I checked around, but found no sign someone had been there. The window was locked from the inside, the closet empty, and my cheap slab bed too low for someone to crawl under. I rushed around my house, checking all the locks and finding nothing amiss. When I returned to my PC, there was another message waiting. More letter salad for the address, and the title was, "An update on your order." Inside was written, "Your parcel is with our courier and should arrive tomorrow. Please expect delivery at 3 a.m. to your specified location." Now at this point, you're probably thinking that I should call the police. That's what I thought too, so I did. I had trouble describing what had happened over the phone, but the harassed-sounding operator told me that an officer would be sent over ASAP. As soon as possible in this case turned out to mean about an hour and a half later, and there was a knock on the door. The policeman listened to my story and looked at the emails, looked around in my room, and then checked about my locks. After all this, he told me there wasn't much they could do, but he would pass his report on to the Cyber Crimes Division, and I should expect contact from them. He advised me to stay with friends until then if I didn't feel safe. I don't know what I had expected, but I didn't feel much better after that. Leaving was good advice, but my family lives in a different state, and I have no friends here yet. Could have checked into a hotel, I suppose, but not many are operating because of the pandemic, and I can't really afford that sort of thing anyway. I attempted to finish my work for the rest of the day, but I was continuously distracted. I checked my emails a lot, not really appreciating the irony of it. Finally, I gave up, made myself some food, and tried to watch TV. There was no programming that managed to distract me from my anxiety, but I wasn't really excited to go up to my bedroom. So I gritted my teeth through a cavalcade of bad reality shows. Finally, I went up to my room and got into my bed. I had got out my old baseball bat and leant it against my headboard within easy reach. I assumed that I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I browsed Reddit on my phone for a while. But despite the fear, my eyelids soon grew heavy. I fell into a restless doze, during which I would start awake every once in a while and check the time on my phone. After doing this 4 or 5 times, I came awake and checked. It was 2:58 a.m. I watched the seconds tick away, every muscle in my body tense, ready for something to happen. The minutes went by. 2:59, 3, 3:01, 3:02. Nothing. I heaved a big sigh of relief and put my phone down. Rolling onto my back, I let my eyes fall closed and thought sleepily to myself that it must have been some cruel prank. I could figure it out in the morning. I lay there settling back into my sleep when I heard a small squeak. My eyes came open again. Another one, followed by a drawn-out scraping sound. It was coming from my window. Paralyzed with fear, my eyes darted sideways. In my peripheral vision, I could see the locking latch rotating. Then the window began to slide open. I felt a gust of nighttime breeze on my cheek, and it carried with it a swampy stench. Something dead and rotting, but strangely acrid and chemical in nature. There was a vague shadow in the darkness outside the window, which, if I turned my head, I would have been able to make out, but I was frozen with terror. I couldn't move. I thought wildly of the baseball bat inches from my head and knew I would never use it. The thing put an arm through the window, and even from my limited vantage, I could tell that something was terribly wrong with it. It was much longer and thinner than any arm should be. It made a wet sound as it slid against the windowsill. The arm felt around looking for the ground presumably, but the window was set quite high in the wall, and even with its prodigious length, it could not reach. The window creaked open further, and the thing flopped in, squelching on the ground. If you have ever seen a cow give birth, the calf crowning seemingly forever and then spurting out in one smooth motion to splatter on the ground, slick with viscera and afterbirth, then you have a reasonably accurate mental image of the entrance that this creature made into my bedroom. It unfolded itself from the floor and got onto its feet. It was person-shaped, but the limbs were long and thin. And on the torso, the rib cage and pelvis stood out so much, it seemed as if only sinews connected them. Its skin, such as there was mostly translucent, allowing me to catch glimpses of muscles sliding against each other as it moved, stretching and contracting, like great big worms writhing about. It had a tangled mane of wet hair that was thick enough to truly be called fur that grew from not just its head, but spread down along the back of its neck and down the spine almost to the tailbone. It reached back out the window and brought something in with it. Insanely, impossibly. It was the package from the photo. The courier, for that is what it seemed it was, shambled unsteadily towards my bed, and I am ashamed to admit that at that moment, I lost control of my bladder. It placed the package gently in exactly the spot that the email had specified and turned towards me. It reached out one of its spindly arms and placed it on my chest, pinning me to the bed. The smell was overpowering now, and I choked, unable to scream or close my eyes or look away. It leaned down until its face hovered over mine, and I saw past the hair, which dripped its stagnant pond water stuff all over me and my duvet, to the face, which would have been normal compared to the rest if it wasn't for the missing flesh on the lower half, the tongue hanging from the mouth, craters and sharp peaks where the teeth should be. The tendons in the jaw were all rancid and rotting meat, barely holding together. Despite this ruinous visage, it was immediately clear somehow that the thing was smiling at me. We stayed in this bizarre half-embrace for what seemed like ages, and then it slowly withdrew. When it took away its hand, it left a piece of card, which, when I tilted my eyes down, I could see had written on it in the same shaky hand, "Thank you for choosing to shop with us." The courier made its exit the same way it came in, even conscientiously closing the window behind itself. Although it did not lock the latch again using whatever means it had to open it in the first place. After a few minutes, I felt safe enough to move again, and all my terror transformed into jangling, frantic energy. I jumped out of bed and grabbed a dressing gown on my way out of the room, staying as far from the package as possible. I ran downstairs and jumped in my car, not bothering to lock my front door behind me. I drove straight to the police station, and I told the woman at the front desk I had been a victim of home invasion. I got to talk to a detective and I told her everything that had happened, but played down the creature, making it seem more like just a regular, if twisted person. It seemed more likely to me they would help me if they didn't think I was crazy. It was probably the right move, I had been thinking, seeing as I was already a disheveled mess, stinking of piss and swamp, wild-eyed and tangle-haired, not so different from the creature itself I hesitated to describe. They gave me a styrofoam cup of coffee and a blanket and let me hang out in their break room while they sent a car to investigate my house. I sat there and stared at nothing for maybe an hour, and then the detective came back in. She rudely jerked the blanket from around my shoulders. "This way, please," she said, her manner stern. Her face gave away nothing, so I mutely followed her. She led me out into the parking lot and back to my car. Confused, I turned to her and asked, "What happened?" Her look of disgust confused me. She replied, "You should know it is a felony in this state to deliberately waste police time. If you're looking for a reaction, you won't find one here. If you filmed any part of this prank, it's a crime to post it online in any form. Now leave, before we decide to detain you." Then she turned around and went back into the building. I felt like sitting down and bawling my eyes out right there, but instead I got into my car and drove home. Once there, I went back up to my bedroom, which the police had searched, I surmised from the rumpled curtains and blankets. The package was still on my damp bed, opened. Sitting amongst the wrapping and packing foam was my USB coffee mug. Our last patient of the day had come in for a crown. Super easy, standard. We see someone almost every day for a crown appointment. Myself and the other nurse I work with split these long appointments between each other as we both assist the only dentist we have working at the moment. It was my turn for this crown, which was great because the 3-hour appointments make the afternoons fly by. Some quick information on how a crown appointment works. We first have to strip away the old fillings, decayed enamel, and cracks, leaving behind only healthy enamel and dentine. Once we've removed all the bad parts, we have to create a margin around the tooth for the crown to sit on, leaving behind a seamless joint after the crown is cemented on. Sometimes the crack or decay can go subgingival, which means we need to create the margin under the gum line. When this happens, the dentist usually just has to pack some cord in between the tooth and the gingiva, just to push the gum away so that we can see the margins. The dentist, I'll call him Paul, was in the process of cord packing on our patient. I'll call him Dean, because the main crack in Dean's tooth that had been causing him pain extended quite close to the lingual gum line, tongue side of the tooth, so we had to push the margin a little bit further under that. Paul had asked for a length of size number 1 cord, which is a dark blue color. Usually while we are cord packing, Paul will just tell stories about his childhood or about teaching, or something that happened to him that day. just to fill the silence while no noisy tools are being used. This time, he was telling us about his drive into work that morning, where he watched a young driver speed past him only to be immediately chased by a police car. Dean was open-mouthed chuckling along, and I was quietly giggling to myself when Paul stopped dead, put the cord packer down, and quickly asked me for the camera. As his hand stretched out to grab the camera from his bracket, I turned to the plastic-covered mouse on the bench behind me to actually take the photos in the program. The camera sprang to life, showing us the bracket that Paul was pointing at, while he turned the overhead light off so that the photo didn't turn out too bright. He pointed it towards the tooth we were working on, the old filling stripped away, the amalgam stain left behind in the healthy dentine, the mostly exposed margin, and the blue cord half poking out from the gum still. I could see where the crown had already been packed, leaving a blue line around about half of the tooth under the gum, but I could also see something else where the margin went the deepest. It couldn't have been the cord. This was something else. It was a darker brown color, not blue. My first thought was it was either a bit of food caught under the gum or even a very old piece of calculus, which had been left there for so long, it has gone from the yellowish color it normally was to a dark shade of brown. That is pretty typical for some gingival calculus. I took the photos of the tooth at varying angles as Paul moved the camera around, and waited for him to ask me to grab an ultrasonic scaler so we could clean out whatever was stuck there. As I looked at Paul, waiting for him to turn to me, I watched his eyebrows shoot up and his eyes go wide behind his loops. I turned my attention back to the screen where the camera was still pointing, just in time to see a slight movement. It almost looked like a close-up of the cord being tugged on under the gum, but again, it wasn't the blue line that moved. It was the dark brown something. I whipped my head back towards Paul. He was already putting the camera back in its cradle and picking up the periodontal probe, which is used to check the health of a patient's gingiva by pushing it into the gums. I watched Dean's forehead screw up just above the sunglasses he was wearing as Paul pushed the probe into the little perio pocket where the brownness was. I leaned my head as far over Dean as I could, trying to get a better look now that the camera view was taken away from me. I watched Paul sink the probe in beside the tooth, get caught on something, and then pull the probe back out and try again. After a couple of goes at it, I could tell that the local anesthetic was starting to wear off, and Dean was starting to feel what was happening. Paul turned the probe over, using the sickle side of the cord back out of the way, putting the now blood-soaked blue piece of string into a tissue I was holding. Paul switched that tool out for the hand scaler, the strongest and sharpest of the tools currently at the tray. After putting the tissue in the bin, I leaned back over. I watched Dean's face screw up again as Paul plunged the tip of the hand scaler back into the spot, going for a real dig when the brown thing moved. Not just any kind of movement, not just being bumped by the scaler. This thing ran away. It zoomed off to the other side of the lingual area of gum, coming to a stop once it was out of reach of the hand scaler. Paul was stunned for a moment, then he shook it off and went for it again, really digging this time to try and get to it. Dean gasped, a look of panic on his half-covered-up face as he looked up into the shock in Paul's eyes. Paul struck gold then, victory taking over the look of shock as he tugged on the scaler. It looked like he had caught the brown spot between the hook of the scaler and the other tooth. So this time, it couldn't flee. He tugged again, and I could see the effort strain in his forearm. He tugged once more, putting more effort into it, and it budged slightly. Determined now, Paul tugged again and again, twice in quick succession. The scaler almost coming out, pulling the spot up to the light the day with it. With one last tug, the scaler came free, and with it came a small brown spider. It was bigger than it looked once it came out from the gum, its leg uncurled now that it had space, and it ended up being about the size of my pinky nail. Seeing that spider sitting on Dean's tooth was enough to make me almost throw up in my mask. A live spider that was tucked in someone's gum for who knows how long. Paul reached for the tweezers on the tray when I saw another brown spot appear, almost like it was coming from the deep. Dean gasped again, a mix of fear and pain, and I watched another set of spider legs poke out from the pocket Paul had just pulled the spider from. Dean tried to say something, tried to yell at us, still with his mouth half proper open. It sounded like something is moving in there, or garbled around Paul's fingers. The second spider pulled itself free as a third, fourth, and fifth brown spider appeared. I screamed, snapping Paul's attention back to Dean's tooth. He dropped the mirror at the same time I jumped out of my chair, tripped on the wheels of Paul's chair, and dropped on the floor like a sack of potatoes. I could hear Paul calling for the other nurse as my head contacted the hard floor with a sickening thud. Then everything went dark. When I woke, I was sitting in my car, my bag on the seat next to me and the keys in the ignition. The sky was getting dark at this point. I had no idea how long I had been sitting there, or how long after I passed out they must have put me here. I decided to try the front door of the clinic, but it was locked and all the lights were off. I haven't tried to contact Paul or the other nurse yet, but a part of me never wants to go back in there ever again. I still don't know what happened to our patient after that. Hi, so I work overnight at a funeral home. My shift starts at 7 p.m. and I get off at 6 a.m. We've had some creepy things happen and I'm loving it. I wanted to share it with somebody but didn't know who, so here are a few of the things. 1. This one happens quite often. Outside of the prep room, the place in the funeral home where we embalm bodies, we will hear footsteps pacing the hallway. At any given point, there are no more than 4 people in the building on a normal night, so for 2 people to be in the prep room and hear this while everybody else is out on first calls would rule out the footsteps belonging to anybody. 2. This one also happens maybe 2 to 3 times a week. The door in my office will slam shut. The other day, for example, I walked through the office door after getting a drink from our break room and went to our dressing area, and the door literally slammed shut behind me. It also happens when I'm at my desk and totally alone in the funeral home. 3. The hallway outside my office with the door that slams shut, I can also hear footsteps pacing back and forth. I tend to just close my office door when I'm working so I don't have to hear it all. 4. Back to the prep room. One night, I was chatting with 2 coworkers outside the prep room. We had just finished embalming some people and were taking a bit of a break before cleaning up and disinfecting/sterilizing everything. We are all standing around outside the door and hear something hit the far wall of the prep room and then hit the ground. Me being me, I went to investigate and it was our trocar button tool, but the last person to use it We all saw him set the tool down on the prep table, about 30 feet away from the wall that it hit before dropping to the ground. 5. Another thing in the prep room that I didn't personally experience, but my coworker on the other shift swears by it that he was prepping somebody while he was alone in the building and the phone on the wall started dialing out. The phone dialed a funeral home in Missouri, the same funeral home that the person on the prep table was going to be shipped to. 6. Last one. This happened last night, actually. We have industrial yellow cabinets that our flammable fluids are stored in. On top of those cabinets are plastic bins that we will put babies in before going in the cooler. That way they can be more protected. Anyways, all of our bins fell off the top of the cabinet. There were 3 of us in the building. I was coming around the corner when I saw it. One person was in the prep room, and the closest person to the cabinet was easily over 30 feet. 2014. First encounter. It was a typical Wednesday in high school, and I had just gone to sleep. In the middle of the night, I found myself in a large, dark room with a grandfather clock and a large mirror. Although it was December, the room was scorching hot and my skin felt dry and itchy. "Come to the mirror, child," came a man's voice. Standing next to me in my reflection was an old but tall man with large black eyes. "Who are you?" I asked, frozen in fear and confusion. "Where am I? What's happening?" "Be quiet, Cody, and listen to what I'm about to say," the old man replied in a quiet voice. "My name is Verulci, and I'm here to guide you. Tomorrow you will be in grave danger. However, I will keep you safe, and in return, you will do as I say. When you are ready to see me again, look in the mirror before you go to bed and say my name. You will see me in your sleep tonight, and I will tell you what to do." Before I could talk back to ask any questions, my alarm clock went off and I had to get up for school. That day at school was a tragedy that would change my life forever. Every American teenager's worst nightmare. A mass shooting. The shooter had caused so many deaths and injuries all in the span of 30 minutes before the cops arrived to the scene. I didn't see any of this though, because right after my bus picked me up, the engine randomly broke down in the middle of traffic. By the time we got to the high school campus, the shooter was already being handcuffed and taken away by police. That night, I lay in bed sobbing over my lost classmates. I was so preoccupied with the shooting that I didn't even think about the weird man in the dream, or what he said. I didn't believe in the supernatural at that age, so the idea never occurred to me that I should be contacting him like he said. I did not believe in Ferrulci until I saw him again. 2016. Second encounter. I was 17 this time, and my life was a mess. My mother had become so paranoid after the shooting that she would not let either of us leave the house. She found an online sales position for herself and a cyber school for me. All of our groceries were delivered to the house, and the only sunshine I ever got was picking them up off the porch. I was miserable all of the time. I mean, how could I not be? My whole high school experience was ruined. I wanted to go through the grieving process in a healthy manner so I could move on with my life, but that was impossible when every day I had to be reminded of it. One day, I decided that I'd had enough. I was going to run away. I started making money by writing English and history essays for my old high school classmates. I was able to charge $30 per paper. By the end of 11th grade, I had around $5,000 saved up from Cash App transactions, which I decided was enough to sneak away. I ordered a cab to a nearby city and found a job and apartment. My plan was to work for a while until I was financially stable enough to live on my own, when I would contact my mother again, and she would see that I was doing fine on my own. My plan backfired though, when my mom tried to kill herself one night in December because she thought I was dead. I stood over her unconscious body in St. Peter's Hospital, sobbing, begging her to recover and wake up. That night while laying in bed, Ferelchi came back to me in an alcohol-induced nightmare. It was the same dark, hot room as before, with Ferelchi looking the same as the first time. "You," I shouted in astonishment. "I've seen you before. You're the man from my dream." "They're not dreams, Cody. When are you going to realize that?" "Please, you helped me the first time. Please don't let me lose my mother." "You never upheld your end of the bargain, remember? I don't work for free. Why should I help you this time, when I was never thanked properly the first time? Please, I promise you, I'll do anything, anything. Just let my mom recover. I don't want her to die." "Anything?" Feralchi's eyes lit up at this, and suddenly the dream ended. I woke up in my bedroom to a text message from my mother saying, "Hey Cody, I'm so sorry about this baby. The doctors say that I'm going to be alright though." Later that night, I tried to contact Feralchi to find out what he wanted me to do for him. I tried saying his name in the mirror before bed, but it didn't work. I just assumed he would come to me when he needed me. 2019, third encounter. My life has settled down for the most part since the second encounter. My mom got the therapy she needed, and I was able to graduate high school and start my electrician license. I had friends again, a normal job, and a decent amount of money. Things seemed perfect from the outside. However, every night I was stricken with anxiety, worried about what I had agreed to. I tried contacting Feralchi every night through the mirror, but he never responded. Finally, in August of 2019, I saw him again. I had been out drinking with some friends when I passed out in my bed, unconscious. "Feralchi, where have you been?" I shouted upon seeing him in the mirror in the dark room. "I've been trying to reach you for nearly 3 years. What do you want me to do for your favor?" Feralchi smiled for the first time since I'd met him. His eyes seemed to grow bigger as he smiled, so big they took up most of his face. "Don't worry, boy. You're already getting started. I'll come to you again for more instruction." Before I could ask any questions, I woke up sitting at my desk with my laptop opened. I had gone to bed last night at 11, but it was now 3 in the afternoon. How long had I been awake for? I looked at my computer search history and saw that around 1 p.m., I had planned a 5-day trip to China from October 3rd to the 8th. The hotel and airplane tickets were already paid for by various debit card accounts that were not mine. In front of my computer was a printed out copy of a Chinese bus schedule around the hotel I had booked, with certain routes circled. Some of the bus routes went into major cities, but some had me going into forests. Okay, I guess Feralchi wanted me to run him favors on the other side of the world. Kind of weird, but I could do it. My father was Chinese, and before he died, he taught me fluent Mandarin. 2019. Fourth encounter. The night I arrived in China, Viralchi contacted me again in my sleep. However, he looked different this time. His eyes had gotten bigger, and I didn't need to look in the mirror to see him. He was right there in front of me, patiently waiting. Finally, "I've been waiting for you," I shouted. "Viralchi, I'm so confused. What do you want me to do here? I have the bus routes written down, but that's about it. And whose card information did you use?" "Don't worry, Cody," he said. "The cards belong to rich men who won't notice a couple $1,000s missing. As for the trip, you let me handle that. I've done everything myself." "What do you mean you've done everything? We just got here." But as soon as I said it, everything went black. "Sir, I brought you some tea." I woke up to the sound of the airplane stewardess's voice. "I heard you coughing and sneezing, so I figured you could use some," she said. I looked around at my surroundings and checked my watch. It was October 8th already, and I was on my flight back to America. Viralchi had control of my body for a whole week, and I had no idea what he did with it. Frankly, I didn't want to know. 2021. Final encounter. It wasn't until the pandemic hit that it really began to dawn on me what had happened. I kept studying the maps that Viralchi printed, Google searching the places on them. The first place I went was Wuhan, where the pandemic started. The other places were all very crowded cities across China. Viralchi found out that COVID existed before any of the scientists, and had me spread it as quickly as possible. I saw Viralchi in my bedroom mirror one night. I guess he had grown so powerful that he didn't need to visit me in my dreams anymore. "How could you do this? You killed all of these people," I shouted at the class. "You saved me and my mother. I thought you were my guardian angel." Viralchi's smile looked bigger and more unnatural in the real world. I could swear he had more teeth than he was supposed to. "I didn't save anybody, you stupid boy. I don't have the power to do that. My only powers are to see what happens everywhere in the world and to enter people's bodies with their permission." In my anger and frustration, I punched the glass, which seemed to amuse Viralchi. As he watched the blood trickle down my knuckles. "How come my mother and I are both alive then? How do you explain that?" "You're alive because your idiot bus driver never checked the engine or changed the oil. The night before the shooting, I saw that there was no way that thing would make it all the way to the school tomorrow. At first, I was pretty sad. Poor kid wouldn't have enough people there to shoot at, but then I realized this was a chance to trick somebody. You were the first stop on that bus, so I figured you would be the best. And your mother is alive because she didn't take enough pills to do any permanent damage. I didn't save her. I just overheard a nurse saying that she was going to be okay. I never performed any miracles. I just let you think that I did." What he was saying made sense, but I still refused to believe it. This was supposed to be my guardian angel, who saved me and my mother's lives. And now, it was all a lie. "So what are you then?" I shouted. "Can I show you?" Viralchi asked. "Yeah." Suddenly my hand rose on its own, making a fist. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. The knuckles pressed against an unbroken part of the mirror, and I started writing with my own blood. FERULCI. Rearranged, it spelled Lucifer. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that cost literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I didn't. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful. Mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. The spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbit or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up. Maybe setting up a target before I left. I heard a crunch from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? Couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up from the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier. The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared up straight like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it, a voice coming from that direction. A female voice. "Help, I'm lost." There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please. I can't walk." The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, I mistook him for a bear. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before he had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but he was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw him smile. How the hell had he heard me get up here and get my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. Fuck off! I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. The next one will fuck you up. Go away. He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified that standoff probably only lasted a minute or two. Maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I couldn't keep him in my scope. He was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another round sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck and wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead, living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole one of these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw was definitely a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, thought I'd share. My daughter Violet was obsessed with fairies. She always wore a fairy costume and wings and a plastic wand. She'd watched every Tinkerbell movie. When I forced her to wear something that wasn't her fairy costume, it would always be something fairy themed or with a picture of a fairy on it. Sometimes Violet would get me to play with her and we'd be fairies, or she and her friends would play fairies. And yet Violet had never seen a real fairy. It was Violet's 6th birthday party. It was fairy themed. The birthday cake was shaped like a fairy. We'd paid for a party entertainer dressed as a fairy princess. It was all going well. Then it came time for her to blow out her candles. She quietly whispered her wish, then blew out her candles. She didn't want people to hear, but I heard her wish. I wished to be friends with real, live fairies. The next day, Violet came to me and yelled, "Mommy, Mommy, my wish came true." "Your wish?" I asked, confused. "My birthday wish. I wish to be friends with fairies and it came true. I have a fairy friend now." "Oh, and what are they like?" I asked, figuring Violet had just made an imaginary friend. "Her name's Elvira, and she has red hair and a green dress. She has other fairy friends too, and she says I'm going to meet them soon." I chuckled to myself when Violet was gone. Little kids were so cute. Over the next few weeks, I learned quite a bit about Elvira. She and her other fairy friends apparently lived in a special fairy world, where it was beautiful and no one aged. Violet told me Elvira had promised to take her there one day. Elvira would always show up at the bottom of a tree in the garden and would tell Violet stories about the fairy world and how she would take Violet there soon. One day, Violet told me that two of Elvira's other fairy friends had showed up and they liked her. Their names were Selena and Elvetta, and they were purple and blue, respectively. "And where do the fairies enter our world?" I asked Violet. "They say they enter through this flower circle, just outside our house. The flowers look like blue daisies, and they're so pretty. They showed me the portal even." I didn't actually take her seriously until the next night. Violet seemed excited all day, which was normally good, but when I asked her why she was in such a good mood, she just giggled and looked at her shoes, as if she had some big secret. She was especially excited at her bedtime. When it was my bedtime, I decided to check on Violet before I went to bed. And what I saw will scar me for life. Violet was sleeping peacefully with a smile on her face, floating in the air. Well, not floating. There were lots of little lights lifting her up. A light flew toward me, and I could see it was a small woman with red hair, bare feet, and a green dress which appeared to be made of leaves. "Elvira," I whispered. She bit me on the finger. I screamed. Her teeth were oh so many and like little needles. Violet and Elvira and the rest of the lights flew out the window and into the night. For a minute, I stood there in shock. Then I ran out the door and started desperately looking for my baby. All I found was a big circle of blue daisies. It's been a week and Violet's case has no leads. Elvira's bite on my finger looks like a bunch of tiny red pinpricks. And I'm worried about getting an infection. But I haven't gone to a doctor because what would I say? A fairy bit me on the finger and spirited my daughter away to some kind of fucked up Neverland. I wish I'd never believed her when she told me. I'm so worried for my baby girl. I woke up on the eve of my 40th birthday. I wasn't so excited to be turning 40. My life had not, like most people, turned out the way I planned. I was divorced and only had limited time with my child. Not the suburban life that I wanted, but what the cards had dealt me. Other than that, my life was just peachy. I was in a shabby apartment, worked at a job that I hated, and was, for lack of a better word, a failure. I sometimes questioned all my life choices and daydreamed about a much younger age or better time. I know it sounds wrong because I have kids, but I think people go through regrets. That was the last thing on my mind before I closed my eyes that night. I woke up as the sun was beating on my face. My hands rubbed against my smooth face. Strange. My face usually sported a beard. I sat up with my eyes still closed due to the sunlight pushing my face. That's when I realized something was wrong. I had blacked out curtains in my shabby dwelling. I must have been dreaming. I finally allowed myself to open my eyes. What I saw would have sent my 40-year-old self into cardiac arrest. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was back in my childhood bedroom. Had I drank too much? Was I having an alcohol-induced nightmare? I slowly got up and walked towards the mirror and the dresser. It was me at 20, when I had selfishly dropped out of college because I had a change of heart and didn't want to be a CPA like my late father. I say late father because my dad died when I was a senior in high school. He was the tragic result of an asshole drunk driving. As a result, I changed my mind from being a history major to accounting. Sadly, college life and drinking caused my grades to crash. I dropped out. I was excited and full of thoughts of all the things I could accomplish with this gift. This wish I'd been granted. I had what most people dream of, a second chance. I could go back next semester and finish my degree. This is what I thought until the door to my room opened. My mother walked in the room holding a cake with 20 candles, followed by my sister, followed by my father. My father that was supposed to be dead and buried for over 2 years. I was at a loss for not only words but breath. I swallowed hard and suddenly I realized that this was a do-over. My dad was not dead. He was here. I jumped up and ran around my mom and sister to embrace him. I hugged him as if I had not hugged him in over 20 years, which was correct in my memories. I could not believe what an amazing blessing I had been granted. My dad. My fucking dad. He was here and not dead like in my memories. My mom and sister were taken aback due to my affection towards my dad. In my memories, we had always been so proper and so cold towards each other, in that sense that we rather not speak rather than argue. I was smiling and crying. By the time I blew out the candles on my cake, I was sure that God or whatever power had granted me a second chance, and I was going to take the best of it. We had breakfast and talked about everything that was going to go down in celebration of my birthday. I was on cloud 9 until my dad and I walked by the mirror in the hallway. I froze on the spot. I stopped as my dad walked towards the front door. I almost lost my breakfast. I had looked out of the corner of my eye. I had seen a melting black figure. Looked like oil over a skeleton. My dad stopped once he saw me looking at the mirror. He urged me towards him. I forgot the image. Feeling myself smile, I followed my dad out the house. Everything was as how it was supposed to be. We were driving down an endless road, a road that seemed to go on forever, to go do something that was going to make my birthday special. I could not recall where or what it was, but I was happy. Then I heard it. A voice said, "Fight it. It's not what you think." I felt my dad's hand on mine and the voice vanished. I turned to my dad and smiled as we continued the drive. Something told me everything was as how it was supposed to be. We kept going on this road and I was happy. My dad was next to me. It was my birthday. I turned on the radio. A voice told me, "He's not your dad. Your dad died. Fight it." I looked at my dad. I felt my blood pressure drop. It was that thing from the mirror. That skeletal figure was driving. He grabbed my hand, and once again, my dad was driving. I was confused and scared. What was going on? I heard it again. "Fight him, son. It's all a lie. You are not there. Whatever he shows you is a lie." I looked at my dad and he kept glitching, switching between my dad and that abomination. What was I seeing? What was this nightmare? I closed my eyes as I felt a pair of hands grab my shoulders and pull me forward. My eyes snapped open. Before me was a middle-aged man dressed as a priest. He smiled warmly at me and asked me my name. I could not remember. Did it start with an A or with an S? He told me that it was okay and to listen closely. He said that everything it told me was a lie. He was there to help me. I was 40 years old and not 20. My father was dead. I tried to reach for him, but my hands were tied to the bed. The priest said it was for my own good. I nodded. I was 40 years old and he was there to help. My father was dead. I was in my bed in my apartment. The Reverend was there to help. The priest started to become blurry and faded. I blinked once. I opened my eyes and my dad was there. I smiled. He reached down towards me. He touched my hand. I smiled and closed my eyes. I woke up as the sun was beating on my face. I just witnessed a hit and run, I think. You read the title. I can't think right now. My heart won't slow down. It's beating. It's been like 20 minutes since I got back and my heart still won't slow down. All I can bring myself to do is write down what happened. Not that I'll ever forget this anyway. So, about 45 minutes ago, I began biking home from my girlfriend's apartment. For context, I'm a freshman undergraduate student at a big public university in the Midwest. I live in a cluster of dorms right at the center of campus, and my girlfriend lives in an apartment on the far southwest edge of campus. It'd be a far walk, but I took a bike to campus, so it's not too much of a hassle to get back and forth. Well, it wasn't until tonight. This was my first time biking the route at night. I knew all the roads and turns I had to make, but with only the moon and an occasional streetlight illuminating the path in front of me, navigating became a bit more difficult. Luckily, the first part of the route was just a straight shot down one road for a good mile and a half. I whizzed along down the road, surprised by the lack of students roaming around. I checked my watch. 2 a.m. This was prime time for drunk freshmen to stumble back to their dorms, yet the streets remained empty and eerily silent. "Hey," a voice called, making me jump so high I would have fallen off the bike if I hadn't been gripping the handlebars. I glanced over my shoulder to see a boy with spiky brunette hair and a gray flannel shirt riding a shoddy red bike. He looked to be about my age, if not a year or two older than me. I couldn't place it, but there was something off about him. "I'm Jared," he said, speeding up until he was riding directly alongside me to my left. "You got a quiet bike, Jared," I replied, deciding not to tell him my name. "Seemed like you came out of nowhere." Jared laughed. "I get that a lot. Hope I didn't scare you. You didn't. I lied. Where are you headed? Jared asked. Just biking around. I lied again. You? You know, this area isn't very safe, Jared said, ignoring my question. Some sickos around these parts. I kept my gaze fixated on the road ahead of me, hoping he'd get the memo I wanted to be left alone. He kept talking, his tone turning more sinister. You heard what happened, didn't you? I didn't respond, a strong breeze cutting through the silence between us. A couple years ago, some fucking sicko ran over a sophomore a couple streets down from here. Killed him instantly. Poor kid. I glanced over at Jared, who was staring directly at me with his pale blue eyes. A chill ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the breeze. Yeah, a real sicko that guy was, he continued. A bunch of people saw him do it, too. Black Chevy Silverado. The car didn't have plates, though, so nobody ever caught him. A real fucking shame. I decided I wasn't going to take any more of this. I took a quick right turn onto a street with very few streetlights, deciding to change up my route a bit to get away from Jared. To my dismay, when I looked back, he had made the turn right after me. In seconds, he was right back by my side. You don't want to go this way, bro. Trust me, we're getting closer to where it happened. Please leave me alone, I said promptly and began to speed up. Jared matched my pace, moving surprisingly fast for his small, worn-down bike. I'm just trying to help, man. Anyway, yeah, that sicko was never caught. And it definitely wasn't an accident because he kept doing it. 3 more hit and runs over the last 2 years. Multiple witnesses every time, but he kept getting away. Fucking bastard. Please, man, just stop. I'm trying to get home, I said weakly, speeding up even more. Jared matched my pace once again. I want to get home too, man. That's why I'm telling you should turn around. This is the exact area he normally hangs out. Exact time of night it usually happens too. We sped down the next few blocks without saying a word. Me refusing to slow down and Jared refusing to fall too far behind me. Suddenly, after we passed a street, a pair of bright headlights flicked on and a car turned onto the road behind us. Jared glanced back, turning ghostly white. What? I yelled, fearing I already knew the answer. My heart skipped a beat as I was able to make out the vehicle behind us. Sure enough, the car was a black Chevy Silverado. No plates. It's him, Jared muttered. The car revved its engine loudly and lurched forward, barreling towards us. I switched the bike into a lower gear and began pedaling like my life depended on it. Come to think of it, it probably did. Jared did the same. We're not gonna outrun it, Jared screamed. Get up onto the sidewalk. I know an alternate route. We can lose him. I looked to my right. Past the thin sidewalk was a row of houses with fences lining the space between them. There was nowhere we could go. No alternate route. The only plan was to outrun the car. Jared veered closer to me, forcing me closer to the curb so our bikes wouldn't collide. I pedaled faster. Dude, now, get onto the sidewalk. Jared screamed, but I refused. He was working with the guy in the car, wasn't he? Did he lure victims to this area so they could get run over? Why was he forcing me off the road? I pedaled even faster. Are you deaf? Do you want to die tonight? The wind pushing against my body became deafeningly loud, drowning out Jared's cries and the Silverado's roaring engine. Still, I knew the car was rapidly gaining on us. All I could do was pedal, pedal, and pray. Jared's voice managed to break through the ear-splitting wind. Listen to me, man. Just keep pedaling. Don't look back and don't stop. Not until you get home. Not for any reason. I looked over at him. His blue eyes were filled with a distant sadness, his hands hovering over the bike's brakes. Wait. Are you? It's okay. Jared spoke calmly. You won't recognize me. Just keep pedaling. What are you? The Silverado's horn blared, its headlights growing increasingly brighter. In less than 30 seconds, we'd be roadkill. It's okay, Jared emphasized again. I've done this before, just not in a while. You know, you're very, very lucky. With that, Jared slammed his fingers down over the brakes. He flew back behind me as I glided down the road. Our eyes both locked on each other as he grew smaller and smaller in my vision. I watched that same look of distant sadness all the way until the Silverado reached him. Right as the collision occurred, I forced myself to turn away, refixing my gaze on the road ahead and trying not to vomit. My brain screamed for me to turn back around, look at the bloody remains and whether the Silverado was still following me, but I didn't. I couldn't look back. Jared had told me, not for any reason. I couldn't stop. I just had to keep pedaling. Finally, a little bit ago, I reached my dorm. I parked and locked my bike in an area that wouldn't be visible from any road. Sprinted to my room and locked the door. Now here I am. I can't get the sound of the screaming wind out of my ears, and I still feel blinded by the lights of the Silverado. Worst of all, I can't get the memory of the collision out of my brain. I'd like to believe I turned away before Jared was hit, but in my heart of hearts, I know that's not true. I know exactly what I saw, but I know that it can't be what I saw. I swear that the moment the Silverado rammed into Jared, him and his bike disappeared into thin air. No matter what really happened, I know one thing to be true. Jared was right. I was very, very lucky. I've been living in a new house for about a week with my brother and both parents. Since it's a fairly large house, me and my brother were given the opportunity to pick a bedroom out of 3. I chose the one at the far end of the hallway. In hindsight, this seems like a good horror setting. I'm not the most friendly or active person, so for the majority of my time at home is spent locked up in my room. Recently, though, my room has gotten more interesting. On my second day of being in my new home, after getting ready and heading to bed, the doorknob to my room began to turn after I had closed and locked it for the night. At first, I thought it was my brother, and decided to let him figure out it was locked, but after a minute of listening to the knob turning back and forth, I began to change my mind. I was thinking it was somehow the cat, so I decided to let him in. I got up and walked to the door. Sure enough, the knob was making slight turns like it would if an animal was trying to get in. I unlocked the door and peered down. Expected to see an orange blur rush past me, but I only saw carpet. My third instinct told me it was my 13-year-old brother playing tricks on me. It's nearing Halloween, so it was to be expected. Thanks for the alarm, but you're 9 hours early. I had called down the hallway. No response. After about 30 minutes of YouTube mobile games later, I heard the distant sound of a fully turned knob, as if someone was entering the room. I sat up and waited for my mother to come in for some last-minute requests, but she never did. I went to the door again, and it turned back as if someone had let go of the knob. I yanked to the door open, but was greeted by an empty hallway. Not even footsteps from my brother if he had tried to hide. I'm not a superstitious person, but I've read enough stories from this subreddit among other places, so after running the odds through my head, I wanted to observe for a bit, to rule out any flukes, of course. Soon after that, the knob began to turn again. Slowly, it turned to the left until it couldn't, then snapped back. Intrigued, I waited. It repeated this again, except to the right. I slowly crept up to the door and placed my hand on the knob. I slowly turned it to the left, then let go, imitating what I just saw. Before I could try again, the knob quickly turned to the right and released. So by then, I had confirmed that at least my doorknob was haunted. After more observation, I figured out what he was doing. This could push in the lock, rattle the handle, and unlock the door on its own. I realize now I should have been scared, but at the time, I had just been invested in discovering whatever it was that was doing this to my room door. I must have fallen asleep because I was woken by my mom pushing the door inwards and hitting me awake. I went about the rest of my day with the knob on my mind. When I got home from school, I ran to my room and locked it. I had taken notes in one of my notebooks about the encounter. I had only tried imitating what the knob did, but never talking to it. 'Cause that would be weird, obviously. No one was home on that third day at the time, so I gave it a try. Hello? A rattle in response. Can you hear me? Another rattle. I waited a bit just to see if it was on a rhythm. Do you understand me? A rattle. That was a dumb question because I didn't know what it was trying to communicate, if at all. Turn if you understand me. The knob held still, then turned slightly. I jumped up all excited and grabbed my notebook. I quickly jotted down a method of simple communication. Okay, a right turn means yes, a left is no. The lock means it's complicated. A rattle means I don't know. Turn left if you understand. A right turn, then a left. I had no clue what that meant. Okay, well, I'll try my best. Are you a ghost? A rattle. Do you know who I am? A left turn. The door unlocked. Does that mean you want to know who I am? The knob turned right almost immediately. Alright, I'm Danielle. Do you have a name? Right turn. Another dumb question. Here's a better question. Are you a guy or girl? Right for guy, left for girl. Nothing, then a left turn. It took a second to adjust myself. It dawned on me that I was communicating with a being that probably wasn't alive. Do you not like my family? I realized I should have been asking about this thing's intentions as soon as I could to get it to communicate with me. The knob locked again. I remember thinking to myself that I was fucked when I heard the front door open. I stood, unlocked the door, and went to help my mom with groceries, almost forgetting about the knob. Since then, I have just been talking to it. Through a long session of reciting the alphabet, I was able to get a name. Limmy, a name I had never heard of. I tried to stay away from questions that I was afraid to hear answers for. Questions like, do you have the power to kill me and my family? Or, do you know how I will die? You know, the typical horror movie stuff. Would I really spend 2 days talking about me and her? I told her what my life was like while I asked yes or no questions about hers. I felt like I was talking to a wall, which I guess I kinda was. What I learned from what little she revealed was that she thought she was 32 years old, knew decades worth of knowledge, big homework help on day 5, and she is not allowed to tell anyone about what her side is like. Her side being the afterlife or whatever it is for her. Now I get to the problem. On day 6, roughly 30 minutes into a conversation with my bedroom door, I decided to ask a question I didn't want to know. Are you only limited to the knob, or can you move around the house? Her response was the first serious red flag I had gotten. All at once, every doorknob began to rattle across the house, almost as if someone was trying to break in through every door with all their strength. It fell silent. Then every knob made the distinct sound of turning and releasing. I was scared shitless. I was half expecting an "it's complicated" or "I don't know." What really scares me is that I think the knob knows it scared me. It began to rattle roughly against the door and didn't stop for a few minutes. All I could do was stare in shock. After it had stopped and gone silent, I got no responses from then on. I don't know how to take its responses or what to do about it. Whatever Limmy is, she has more power than she let me know. I'm scared to sleep in my room anymore because I'm pretty sure I made her mad. It's now day 8. I've gotten no responses from the knob. I can only hope that it left, but I'm not that naive. Mom should have been home by now from work. My cat is the only company I get when home from school. It's just so quiet at home. I'm just hoping Mom makes it back because I have no clue if Limmy can transfer to a car. I was walking home from work at Tim Hortons since it was relatively close and I hated driving at night. The way back was tedious on foot, but I made sure to find shortcuts to avoid wasting time. The main road to my neighborhood was quite busy, but the fact that there was no sidewalk on this well-maintained road was a joke. This meant that walking along the road was quite risky at night, considering the large amount of traffic feeding in. A few weeks ago, I found a gravel path making its way through the foliage beside the road to a kids' park near the entrance of my neighborhood. The park was never occupied at this time of day, or any for that matter, due to its old, unkempt appearance. Today that changed. As I passed through the trail to the kids' park, I noticed a rusty swing in use. Although it was hard to tell who was using it, I approached closer and realized that the person on the swing was barely swinging at all. It was moving an inch forward and backward, as the person was basically keeping still. I couldn't make out their facial features, but it soon became clear to me that it was no child. It was a fully grown man. He seemed to be wearing baggy clothing and a mask. I walked up to about 20 meters from the park when I saw it. The man was wearing a clown suit. "Hello?" I confusedly asked. There was no response. I walked up to the swing set and got a closer look. No wonder there was no response. It was a mannequin in a clown suit in a sitting position on the swings. It was beyond me how it got there, or who placed it there, but I continued home nonetheless. My house was relatively modern, but I had got it for a cheap price because the neighborhood was laughable. The roads hadn't been paved in a decade, no lawns were maintained, and many other homes on the block were in dire need of renovation like my renovated house. I located my home and entered using my key. Today was a busy shift, as it was a Monday, and several people wanted to start their week with a coffee and a bagel. Extremely tired, I headed straight from my bed and tucked myself into my comfortable sheets. I was home alone and had been since I moved in, which is probably why when I dozed off, I dreamt about parties, magicians, dancers, presents, and cake that night. These dreams were cut short, though. I awoke to an aggressive series of knocks at my front door. Immediately, I checked my bedside clock and the numbers 318 glared back at me in bright red. My mind raced to consider the several possibilities. There were none. Who was at my front door at 3 a.m. in the morning? Knock, knock, knock. I sat up straight. Was this a prank? The person isn't going to stop bothering me, are they? Annoyed, I lazily got out of bed and put on a shirt. I slipped on a pair of slides and made my way downstairs. Suddenly, as I was walking down the staircase, I felt an air of unease about the situation. This could potentially be dangerous. So, before heading to the door, I went to the living room and equipped myself with a trusty pistol hidden in a secret compartment within my coffee table. It was already loaded, and I proceeded towards the door. Slightly nervous, I unlocked the door and swung it open. Facing me was the clown mannequin. I didn't move for a solid 5 seconds in pure shock before I angrily started craning my neck around my front yard to see who had played this prank on me at this hour. I scanned the surrounding area in more depth, but to no avail. The mannequin in front of me was still as a rock and was staring right at me. I was frustrated that I had let some prankster get the better of me and run off, so I slammed the door in the clown's face and decided to deal with it when I got up for work. Sleeping soundly, I drifted off into more obscure, faded dreams this time. I was somewhere, with someone enjoying a laugh. Perhaps I had just seen something hilarious. It occurred to me that I wasn't the only one laughing, and this continued for an unusually long amount of time. The laughing became intense, and it felt like this dream wasn't funny anymore. Soon the sound was horrible. It was wheezing, insane laughter that was definitely not coming out of me. I woke up in a cold sweat, squirming around the uncomfortable pool around me in my bed, but the laughing continued. Perplexed, I rubbed my eyes and pinched myself. This was all but reality. I sat up and listened carefully to the sound. It was coming from outside. My window was half open, and I immediately regretted the decision to leave it that way before I slept. Someone or something was out there. It was that guy, wasn't it? I quickly picked up my pistol that I had brought upstairs and cocked it back. In a swift motion, I aimed it outside and downwards, onto the ground, but what I saw will continue to plague my nightmares. It was the same clown mannequin, standing perfectly still. The mask was made to grin, and its head had been tilted to face directly up at my window. The laughter had ceased, but I filled with rage. In sheer fury, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Who's there?" That was loud, really loud. I waited a few seconds to see if any neighboring lights turned on, if I had disturbed somebody in their slumber. Nothing. Returning to my previous annoyed state, I glanced around the area trying to spot whoever was playing this sick joke on me. Everything seemed normal. Nothing was out of place, and there was nowhere someone could have been hidden down there. I would have closed the window, this time fully, and gone back to bed, but if not had been for the gut-wrenching sound of the same exact laughter. I turned around to face out the window, and, of course, The clown had departed. What a night, I thought, as I let out a sigh of despair. Not taking any chances, I went downstairs to make sure all the doors were locked and that all the windows in the house were locked as well. I couldn't sleep tonight, as I was either going insane or had just been the victim of the creepiest prank ever. I waited an hour and a half for someone else to happen, but nothing did. I noticed I was becoming very tired. I had worked a full shift and my sleep was interrupted twice by a mannequin in a clown suit. I was angry. I told myself if I saw the person behind this, I would either call the cops immediately or deal with them myself using my pistol. I dug my head in my pillow and screamed until I calmed down, relaxed, and eventually passed out. The morning came, and for that I was grateful. Sunlight poured into the room and illuminated every corner of it. Something was off, though. The sunlight was dark crimson. This was my room, but it didn't seem like it at all. Another dream. I was not looking through my own eyes, but rather the eyes of something else in my room. In fact, I was staring directly at myself. I was sound asleep in my dream, too. I just stood there, unmoving, concentrating on the lump in the bed that I was. Time seemed to stand still. Perhaps time didn't progress right now. Whatever or whenever now was. The crimson in the room was perpetual and so was everything else, until I started to notice something new. Laughter. I woke up properly this time and I noticed I was breathing heavily. I've done this before, I thought. My heart was racing though, and I could not wrap my mind around the abstractly nonsensical dream I just experienced. I had heard that sick laughter before waking up, and evidently was delving further into the depths of insanity now. All that changed when I sat up in my bed. The thing was right there. It was standing directly in front of my bed. This was no dream, and I was not insane. I screamed, probably louder than I ever have, jumped out of my bed and tackled the mannequin. It fell easily, as though most pieces of plastic. I was in a craze and lunged for my pistol on my nightstand. I shot at the thing, then shot again. I shot a few more times for good measure and then threw the gun at it after it was out. My breathing was even heavier, and I stared blankly at the mannequin I just shot at several times. What just happened? The situation was absurd. There was a clown mannequin in my room. I had tackled it and then proceeded to shoot at it. I slightly chuckled in triumph. I had defeated the mannequin. I doubled over and broke into hysterical laughter.